Argentinians are protesting against the International Monetary Fund. In the United States, Bernie Sanders has won the new Hampshire Democratic Primary. There has been a 48% reduction in the daily number of confirmed cases of the coronavirus over the last week. Hi, hello, welcome. This is from the south, from Havana. Argentina has postponed the payment of $1.47 billion of its foreign debt just after a mission from the International Monetary Fund arrived in Buenos Aires to begin talks on restructuring the country's debt. And on Wednesday, protesters urged the government to prioritize food security and social services over paying off the massive bailout loan agreed between the IMF and the previous administration of Mauricio Macri. More demonstrations are planned on Thursday by trade unions and social movements that support the current government's attempts to renegotiate with the IMF.
It is the debt payment or hunger or the debt the government owes the people. The money should not go to the International Monetary Fund. It should actually be a serious plan capable of helping the poorest sectors.
Last week, the Argentinian Senate unanimously approved President Alberto Fernandez's bill to restructure the $100 billion of foreign debt. The government says the debt is unpayable in its present form and that the priority is to leave the country out of recession and tackle the poverty and inequality left by Macri's right-wing administration.
Obviously, the case of President Trump, who decided to support Macri in the election because we were, according to what they said, the worst there was in politics. So Trump decided to support him with $57 billion US. But the problem was that the $57 billion wasn't to be used in the reactivation of the economy, but to cover the financial speculation.
Brazil's National Union of Teachers of Higher Education Institutions began consultations with its grassroots branches to call a national strike in rejection of far-right President Jair Bolsonaro and his attacks on the Brazilian education system. Teachers are concerned about the eventual approval of a constitutional amendment through which Bolsonaro could impose a cutoff up to 25% on public servant hours and salaries. Meanwhile, over 20,000 oil workers from the state-owned Petrobras company continue the 12th day of an indefinite strike across in the South American country, in rejection of Bolsonaro's attempt to privatize the oil industry. The right wing in Bolivia is doing all it can to prevent the country's biggest party, the Movement Towards Socialism, from returning to power in the upcoming May 3rd elections. The Electoral Tribunal is undertaking a revision process of the registration of the candidates Evo Morales and Luis Arce, as well as others. This authority has barred 365 hopefuls from standing in the elections, including 57 from the MAS party.
Bolivia's right is not satisfied with forcing the MAS government to resign through the coup on November the 10th last year. It wants to wipe these leaders off the political map. And the most symbolic case is former President Evo Morales' candidacy for the Senate.
Those who have gone or tried to go to seek asylum and support in other countries are automatically excluded.
To stand for a seat in the Senate is outrageous. I am not going to prejudge what the Electoral Court will decide. We hope it will rule him ineligible. If it doesn't, we have time and we'll see what other legal mechanisms we can use.
The main mechanism now for politically annihilating the MAS leaders is to get them ruled ineligible for the elections on May the 3rd, using the argument that they do not meet the 3- or 5-year residency requirements stipulated in the law.
By Wednesday, we will complete the documentation demanded. However, it seems strange to us that they have also demanded this of our candidate, Luis Arce, because we have checked and all the required documents were presented.
The Supreme Electoral Court has not yet approved the nomination of Evo Morales and 700 other candidates, and it's given them until midweek to deliver the documents it says are missing.
The Supreme Electoral Court will begin to analyze on Thursday the additional documentation delivered by the candidates not yet approved. This work will be completed on Monday when we will inform their parties.
However, it has been made clear that if these candidates meet the requirements and are approved, the door will remain open until a few days before the May the 3rd elections for others to challenge their nominations.
Candidates who are approved by the Electoral Court can still be challenged if some other party or political organization thinks there is reason to do so.
This is one way for the right, which is standing 7 candidates in these presidential elections, to remove the movement for socialism from the political scene. But through the de facto government, it is also pursuing legal cases against several of the candidates of the MAS, the party led by the former president Evo Morales.
Young people across Venezuela marched on Wednesday to commemorate the country's Youth Day and the 206th anniversary of the Battle of Carabobo. The vice president of the National Constituent Assembly's Youth Commission, Malawi, stressed that Venezuela's youth were marching in support for the country project and a future built through the Bolivarian Revolution. Malawi also recalled that the National Constituent Assembly has been mobilized nationwide in every school and university to debate the draft bill on youth employment aimed at better incorporating the sector in the labor force. Venezuelan opposition lawmaker Juan Guaidó received a frosty reception when he arrived to Caracas airport on Tuesday. The self-proclaimed president of Venezuela returned to the country after a tour of Europe and the United States, during which he called for more sanctions against the South American nation. On his arrival, citizens and airport workers voiced their repudiation of his presence. Guaidó was confronted by a worker from the state-owned airline Conviasa, which was subject to U.S. sanctions last week. The airline worker called him a traitor for promoting the sanctions against the Venezuelan consortium. There has been widespread indignation in El Salvador following the events of Sunday, when President Nayib Bukele sent troops into parliament. The president was trying to force lawmakers to vote for a $109 million loan intended to strengthen the country's security forces.
Criticisms of the military occupation of parliament, ordered by President Nayib Bukele, have come thick and fast from a range of citizen bodies.
I think this is the first important defeat for the government of President Bukele. There are now 2 alternatives. Either the president continues with his aggressive attitude of slandering and attacking people all the time, and that would only deepen the country's problems, or he learns the lesson, which is that he cannot lead an effective government which tackles the country's problems by breaking the constitutional rules.
After the Constitutional Court ruled that the president's call for an extraordinary session of parliament to approve his loan was unconstitutional and ordered him not to use the armed forces and the police in this way, members of the assembly also condemned his actions.
We have issued a strenuous condemnation of the fact, for example, that the police broke into the parliament's premises by breaking through the gates and jumping over walls. Then the army and the police and the president himself came into the chamber without being invited.
20 years after the peace accords were signed in El Salvador, the younger generation, who have grown up in democracy and peace, are alarmed by the government's actions.
Our people had to struggle for decades to rid themselves of terribly bloody military dictatorships. So we, as young people, have inherited that. And it is our duty to understand where our country came from, to know its history. The fact that we did not live through those atrocities doesn't mean we don't have to understand them.
Sunday's events continue to draw criticism at home and abroad. President Nayib Bukele says he will comply with the court's ruling, which forbids him from calling another such extraordinary session of the Legislative Assembly.
Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermúdez received Cardinal Timothy Dolan, Archbishop of New York, on Tuesday afternoon, who is visiting the country after an invitation of the Cuban head of state and the Cuban Conference of Catholic Bishops. This is Dolan's first visit to the island, where he has been warmly welcomed. During his stay, he has met with members of the Conference of Catholic Bishops and visited sites associated with the activity of the Church and other interests. He has also officiated several masses, including one in the minor basilica of Our Lady of Charity of El Cobre in Santiago de Cuba and in the Metropolitan Cathedral of Havana. And Cardinal Dolan spoke to reporters about his impressions during his visit to the island, emphasizing that tensions between the U.S. and Cuba have been recurring throughout history.
What's interesting to me is that while there may be tension with the two governments, the people seem to love one another. So the people in the United States have a tremendous admiration for the people of Cuba. And I sense in my short time here that the people of Cuba love the people of the United States. So I hope the people, I hope the spirit of the people towards reconciliation conquers. So.
Coming up, Senator for Vermont Bernie Sanders has won the New Hampshire Democratic Primary. Don't go away. Welcome back. Senator for Vermont Bernie Sanders has won the New Hampshire Democratic Primary. Sanders secured 26% of the vote to beat his closest rival, former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who finished with 24.4%. It was another bad night for former Vice President Joe Biden, who sank to a disastrous 5th place with just over 8% of the vote.
And what I can tell you with absolute certainty, and I know I speak for every one of the Democratic candidates, is that no matter who wins, and we certainly hope it's going to be us, we are going to unite together. We are going to unite together and defeat the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country. Now, our campaign is not just about beating Trump, it is about transforming this country. It is about having the courage to take on Wall Street, the insurance companies, the drug companies, the fossil fuel industry, the military-industrial complex.
The Organization of American States is preparing to choose its new Secretary General for the next 5 years. The Permanent Council of the OAS will hold an extraordinary session on Wednesday at its Washington headquarters to receive the 3 candidates for Secretary General: current Secretary General Luis Almagro, Hugo de Sela from Peru, and Maria Fernanda Espinosa from Ecuador. The Council will hear the candidates' proposals and initiatives for the organization. The election will be held on March 20th, when the OAS will also choose an Assistant Secretary General. And the former President of the UN General Assembly and former Foreign Minister of Ecuador, Maria Fernandez Espinosa, presented her perspective for the OAS. If elected, she will be the first woman to lead this organization. Espinosa said she would promote real integration in the region, including Caribbean nations. She was nominated by Antigua and Barbuda and St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
The countries of the Caribbean have great potential for development and are a hemispheric example of regional economic integration. The particular challenges demand special attention from the OAS. I propose a Trans-Caribbean Blue Economy Initiative, a funding and transfer initiative for low-carbon technologies. I will put into full operation this time the contingency fund for natural disasters. I will use the convening capacity of OAS together with CARICOM to facilitate dialogue and agreements on financial services and other macroeconomic challenges. I will encourage the strengthening of interconnectivity efforts with and among the Caribbean. I will promote a student and cultural exchange initiative for the development of bilingualism among the American and Caribbean peoples. Breaking down the language barrier will guarantee real and lasting integration.
The Mexican Senate approved on Tuesday a legal reform to offer major protection guarantees to women victims of gender violence. The modifications to the general law on women's access to a life free of violence, which seeks to broaden protection orders for victims, was passed by the Senate with 112 votes in favor of the abstention. Mexican feminist organizations have demanded protection against feminicides and gender-based crimes.
Anti-monument. It has become a meeting point for feminist groups to protest widespread violence against women.
They don't understand the pain of mothers who have lost their daughters. It's impossible to explain. They just don't understand it.
In their last meeting, they commemorated Fatima's death, which remains unpunished. She was 12 years old when 3 men tortured her, raped her, and killed her in the state of Mexico.
We will keep fighting for our daughters, for our mothers and sisters. We will do everything that's possible to bring this to an end, so there are no more deaths. We want all of us to be alive.
In this country, almost all femicides stand in impunity. According to the Attorney General, criminal law needs to be reformed so the public ministry can validate the crimes when they are motivated by gender.
If the public ministry has a specific capacity to resolve homicides, and if there is a vulnerable group, we need to work within our established parameters. We need to create laws that work within our abilities, not beyond them, because that does not help the victims.
However, feminist groups reject the proposal, considering that their years-long struggle will be discarded.
The reform seeks to diminish the importance of gender-based violence and to ignore the fact that femicides often end in impunity. This happens due to a lack of proper training and weak due process by certain institutions.
In the meantime, mobilizations are constant on the streets, demanding increased safety and an end to gender-based violence, as according to official numbers, femicides increased by 137% over the last 5 years.
Former Italian Minister of the Interior, Matteo Salvini, is facing a potential trial for refusing to allow a migrant boat to dock last July. He faces up to 15 years in prison if found guilty. Italian senators will decide on Wednesday whether far-right leader Matteo Salvini should face trial on charges of illegally blocking the docking of a Coast Guard boat carrying migrants. A court in Sicily has recommended that the former minister stand trial. Under Italian law, ministers cannot be tried for measures adopted while in office unless a parliamentary committee gives the go-ahead. The death toll from the novel coronavirus, now officially named COVID-19, has risen to 1,115 in mainland China. Despite public fears that the coronavirus outbreak could become a full-blown pandemic, public health experts have called for patience until more details about the virus are known. Reports from the Chinese National Health Commission revealed that there has been a 48% reduction in the daily number of confirmed cases over the last week. And 2 Chinese nationals hospitalized in Russia with the coronavirus have fully recovered and were discharged, according to Russian officials. A Chinese tourist treated in Chita, eastern Siberia, was discharged on Wednesday after a series of tests revealed he was no longer carrying the virus. Likewise, a hospital in Tyumen in western Siberia also discharged a female Chinese student. Officials said both patients suffer from a mild form of the COVID-19 disease and no longer posed a risk to others.
The patient had been treated in our hospital. He got the whole set of necessary diagnostic and curative procedures according to standards and orders. Today, he has been discharged home.
Dozens of Japanese took refuge at the beachside resort of Katsura to wait out a 14-day self-imposed quarantine after being evacuated from China's Hubei province, where the new coronavirus originated. On Wednesday, after final test results confirmed all 197 evacuees were free of the virus, the first handful began heading home. While countries including the United States, France and Britain have obliged their evacuated citizens to go into quarantine on their arrival, Japanese officials said there was no legal framework permitting them to enforce the same measures. After the break, Syrian government forces have advanced in their offensive in the northwest region. Stay with us. Welcome back. Syrian government forces advanced their offensive in the country's northwest this Wednesday, securing areas along a key national highway as tensions grow with Turkey due to its support for extremist rebel groups. Hours after securing complete control over the vital M5 highway linking the country's 4 largest cities, Syrian forces cleared all areas directly west of the road in Aleppo province of rebels. The Syrian army on Tuesday condemned the escalation in Turkish attacks in northern Syria, saying such aggressions go against international law, while also stressing readiness to retaliate. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has threatened to strike Syrian government forces everywhere if his troops are attacked. Speaking in Ankara, Erdogan said Turkey is determined to push the Syrian army out of northwestern Idlib province by the end of February. Tensions flared up between Damascus and Ankara in the last few weeks, with Syria accusing Turkey of supporting anti-government rebels. Erdogan claimed that Damascus is attacking the civilian population of Idlib to force displacement to the borders of Turkey and facilitate the conquest of the region.
I hereby declare that we will strike regime forces everywhere from now on, regardless of the Idlib and Sochi deal. If any tiny bit of harm is dealt to our soldiers at observation post or elsewhere.
The Russian and Turkish presidents held a phone conversation to discuss the escalation in Idlib province, northwestern Syria. Turkey's President Erdogan said the two leaders had evaluated the ongoing process in Idlib and especially addressed the attacks on Turkish soldiers by Syrian forces. A Russian delegation held talks in Turkey's capital Ankara on Saturday and Monday over the tensions in Idlib but failed to reach any agreements. UN Health Agency experts met on Wednesday to decide whether the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo should still be considered a global health emergency following a sharp decline in reported cases. WHO Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said on Tuesday he was encouraged by an improvement in the situation, with only 3 cases reported in the past week. A period of 42 days with no new cases reported is required for the epidemic to be declared over. The WHO declared Ebola a public health emergency of international concern last July, a move which gives it greater powers to restrict travel and boost funding. The outbreak was first identified in August 2018 and has since killed more than 2,300 people in eastern Congo. Malawi's Electoral Commission chief defended on Wednesday the use of results sheets that had been altered with correctional fluid in last year's disputed presidential election. The Constitutional Court last week annulled the May results that gave President Peter Mutharika a narrow victory, citing widespread irregularities, especially the massive use of correction fluid on ballot sheets. The court ordered a fresh election within 150 days and an investigation into the conduct of the Electoral Commission. Appearing before a special parliamentary committee, the chairwoman of the Electoral Commission, Jane Ansah, claimed she saw nothing wrong with the acceptance of sheets that were altered using correction fluid. Kenyan women living on the coast have found a way to help themselves and send their children to school while helping to conserve the butterfly population of the local forest. The local women care for and collect the butterflies, which are then exported for butterfly parks, education institutions, and scientific research all over the world. According to the UN Environment Programme, the Arabuko-Sokoke forest was part of a massive forest which extended from Somalia to Mozambique. Today, all that's left are 42,000 hectares on the coastline between Malindi and Mombasa, which were declared a UNESCO heritage site. Among the spectacular wildlife, around 230 species of butterflies can be found. And we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And please join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Cristina Escobar. Thank you for watching.